Hey guys, it's Max. Welcome to our step-by-step build guide where I'm going to show you exactly how you can build a full gaming PC for only $350 even if you've never built one before. Now I'm going to be upfront with you guys, all of the parts that I chose here were chosen for one reason. They are inexpensive because trust me, it is extremely hard to make a PC for $350, but it can be done as you guys will see. And as always, we have all the links to these parts in the video description along with alternative links because prices do go up and down, things go out of sale, so the prices you guys see might be a little bit different. And then we'll also have some alternatives and suggestions if you have a little bit more money to spend on what you could do to get better performance. At the heart of this build, we have two AMD CPUs that are brand spanking new. We have the new 3100 and the 3300X. Now for the $350 build that you'll see, we're using the 3100. It is only $99 and it has 4 cores, 8 threads, brand new 7nm. It's a great CPU for the money. And if you're gonna have a little bit more money to spend and you're gonna get our recommended graphics card upgrade, then we will say spend the extra $20 on the 3300X, which does have better gaming performance. Next, I have 8 GB of DDR4 RAM, just one stick for this $350 build. And then I also have a small M.2 SSD because it is just super easy to install. Now I'm going with just one stick, that way later on when you have an extra $35, you can go ahead and get another stick and then you're gonna get a little bit more performance out of it and a little bit more overall RAM, just so that we're not locked in. As for the SSD, this is definitely not going to hold a ton of games, but it's going to give you a quick system, fast boot ups, and then if you want to get a regular spinning hard drive, you could do that, or maybe upgrade to a larger one. The power supply and the motherboard were both chosen because they are inexpensive. That's the main thing. The motherboard still has some good features, so you're not going to be, too limited. And the power supply, the one I have here is slightly different than the one I'm linking to just because I had this on hand, but we're going to the budget option because we're reaching that really cheap price point. And along with that, I'm not gonna, lie to you guys, this is a very cheap case because we had to get a cheap one for the price point, but it does have a side window so you can see your parts inside. It also has a USB 3.0 port, a headphone jack, a couple other USB ports, so you do get some features with it. And lastly, the graphics card. It's important for gaming. This one is an AMD 560. It was chosen because of the price point, and as I mentioned, we do have alternatives down below with some suggestions if you can stretch your budget just a little bit. And I do have actually somewhere down here my recommended graphics card for about $80 more, which is not that much more, which is the 580 that will give you quite a bit better performance. Let's go ahead and jump into the build. The first thing you want to do if you don't have an anti-static strap is touch a metal object. Make sure you don't have any static electricity built up. And we're gonna go ahead and get started by placing the motherboard on the motherboard box. It's a good surface to work off of. And I'm gonna be putting almost everything on the motherboard before we pop it in. So here we have our CPU. You do not want to touch these bottom pins. They can get bent easily. Be very careful. Also don't touch the top. You don't want oils on there. And there's a little lever on the CPU socket. So we're going to pull out a little bit and then pull up to release and unlock. And on the CPU, there's a little triangle in the corner, and that tells you how to place it into the CPU socket. There's a little triangle up here as well. So I'm going to twist this and then very carefully align it, and it should just drop right in. And then now I'm gonna grab this lever, push it down, and lock it. And now we're gonna attach the cooler. We're using the one that's included with the CPU. You definitely don't need to spend extra money, it works good enough. And we do have thermal paste, so you don't want to touch that. And this will actually screw into the motherboard, and our motherboard already has some other mounts on here. So I'm going to go ahead and just unscrew these. And now I'm going to go ahead and align our screws with the little sockets over here. You want to make sure that when you set it down, you don't start moving it side to side because you don't want to smear that thermal paste. So what I do is I align the backs and then slowly lower it down. And now I'm going to start by screwing down one side. I'm not going to do it all the way. I'm gonna do just enough to get it started. Then I'm gonna go to the opposite side here, get that one going. And then after each one has been threaded in, then I'll slowly go and just tighten it all down. Just so we want even pressure on this. And now let's plug in the CPU fan connector. It's right up top here labeled CPU fan 1. Now let's install the M.2 SSD. You want to get out the little screw that came in the baggie in your motherboard box. Your M.2 SSD has a couple of notches cut out, but it will only go in one way, so don't force it. And typically it's going to be the label side up. So I'm going to attach it, plug it in at an angle, then we're going to push it down and it'll line up with this little spot for the screw, and we'll just screw that down just enough to get the screw to stop. Now let's go ahead and install our RAM. Oftentimes I actually do this inside of the case, but just to make it easier to show you guys, I'm gonna do it outside. If you do it outside, you could still install the motherboard later. It just makes it a little bit difficult with a couple of the screws, but let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned at the start, we just have one stick of RAM. This is 8 gigs. That's because it's less expensive than getting 2 4 gig sticks, and that helps us reach our price point. And in the future, you can add another 8 gig to get to 16, so you get a little bit more flexibility, but you might get slightly lower performance with just one stick out of the get-go. I'm gonna go ahead and install it in this right-hand slot. So I'm gonna open this up just on this end. And on the stick, there's actually a little cutout, a little notch, and that's gonna match up with the little notch inside of the RAM slot. We're gonna align the stick with the slots, and I'm just gonna have, push down with even pressure on both ends. And you guys heard in that click, and you guys saw it actually get locked in place. And now I'm gonna set the motherboard and everything else aside. I'm gonna grab our case, and we're gonna get this prepped up for the motherboard. So we're gonna start out by taking off these thumb screws with the side panel, both the front one and the rear one. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna carefully lower down this motherboard, and I'm gonna see if the standoffs, basically the little points that we're gonna be screwing the motherboard down to, line up with these holes. So as you guys might see, we have a couple up here, and then we have 4 more over here. So let's go ahead and drop it in carefully. It looks like almost everything matches up. The top 2 match up, these 3 match up, and then just this one right here, you guys might see, the standoff is slightly lower. So now I know I only have to adjust one of them. Yep, I can just unscrew with my hand. If it's too tight, most cases will have a tool to remove it, or you can use some pliers. And I'm just gonna screw it in to the one right above that. And now we're gonna pop in our I/O shield. You do wanna be careful because the edges are sharp. And the little 3 holes for your audio inputs and outputs, they're gonna be at the bottom. So you can go ahead and just press it against the back panel and then apply pressure on one side, then the other to get it to lock in. Let's go ahead and drop this back down. And now we can go ahead and install our motherboard. Just like before, I'm gonna carefully lower it down, but now we have the I/O shield so that we wanna make sure that we don't push anything in, make sure everything's aligned properly. And then you have to apply a light pressure to get it to pop in. We're gonna set it down. You'll wanna grab 6 of the smaller screws that are included with your little baggie, and then we're gonna screw down this motherboard at the 6 points. We have 4 here at the bottom, and then 2 at the top, and magnetic screwdriver really helps with this. And now we're gonna connect our case to the motherboard. We have these 3 separate cables. This one, the biggest one, is USB 3.0. It's easy. These other 2 are easy as well, but I'm gonna do it after I get these done. These little ones are the toughest. You have a bunch of small ones. They are all labeled, and if you bought the same motherboard that we did, on page 16, you're gonna have a guide that shows you exactly where they need to be plugged in. The motherboard also does have some markings, but they are quite small, and this part is just really hard to show on camera, so I'm just gonna plug these in as they are labeled. Check out your motherboard and your owner's manual, and you'll see exactly where to pop them in. That's set plugged right over here. Next, I'm gonna do our USB 3.0 cable. There's a little notch over here, so you can't insert it the wrong way. That's aligning right there. You wanna align that and then push in. And then the last one is USB and audio. Our audio is right over here in the bottom left-hand side. And then if you take a look at the pins, there is one missing, and that shows you how to plug it in, just so all the pins match up. I'm gonna go ahead and split the cable because our USB port is on the other side, and that will plug in. And our USB plugs in right down here next to the USB 3.0. If you want to do a little bit of a cleaner job on the inside, instead of plugging them in as they come from the case, you can run the cables and wires through the back and then through one of these little cutouts just to make it a little bit cleaner, but we have a lot of extra space, and I'm just gonna do some cable management later. And now we are gonna install our power supply, so I'm gonna lift up our case here, grab our power supply, and I'm gonna insert this from the inside over here, and slide it in, and then line up the holes. I'll go ahead and insert it, and I want to tuck it underneath this little metal bracket that stands out. And you want to line up the holes here where we're going to put our little bolts into. I'll grab 4 of the larger ones from our baggie, And then we can go ahead and align them and tighten down our power supply. And now we have a mess of cables sticking out over here. And this case is not designed for good cable management. As you saw earlier, all the cables from the case come out the top, which makes it harder to manage, but we're gonna do what we can. I split up these cables into two sections. So the first one is our 24 pin, and then we have the one that's labeled CPU. So that's gonna be important. And then we have one more for the graphics card labeled PCI Express. And then all these other ones, I'm gonna go ahead and just tuck these into this hard drive tray. If you install both hard drives, you won't be able to, but if you do just one, you could just put it in the lower slot. Now we are gonna need one of these Molex connectors for the fans, and then if you're gonna do a standard hard drive, you will need one of these SATA power cables. So I'm gonna pull one of these all the way through, because we're gonna use that, and the rest I'll just tuck in. I'm gonna keep our graphics card cable labeled PCI Express here on the outside, and these two, I'm actually gonna go ahead and route them through this little cutout that is right next to the power supply on the right-hand side, just to keep this a little bit cleaner. You guys can see that right over here. And now I'll grab our 24 pin, and I'm gonna route it back in through this top cutout, closer to where we're gonna plug it in. And then the one that's labeled CPU, I normally would route it up through here. It is really tight on this particular case. If you have a different case, you upgraded it, you'll have some extra room. So because of that, I'm gonna route it through the same slot, and then we're gonna just pull it up where we're gonna plug it in. And now I'll grab my rear fan power cable, and I wanted to feed it through here, but like I said before, it's just way too tight on this case. Usually you do have room. So I'm gonna just unscrew the top two screws just so I have a little bit of play here to route it through. And then I'll go ahead and just pull that 4-pin Molex connector and cable to the back. Make sure you don't forget to tighten those back up. And now I can go ahead and connect our PC case fans to these 4-pin Molex connectors. And then if you choose to spend a little bit extra money on an LED strip or two, these things are very inexpensive. We have a link down below. You can also route that cable through, and then we'll also plug that in. And then if you choose to buy one of these very inexpensive LED strips or two, you can route that power cable through the bottom slot over here as well, and then connect it to our 4-pin Molex right there. And the last thing I want to point out is we have this SATA power connector as we push all these cables in. So if you're gonna have a regular spinning hard drive, you're gonna use that to connect it. Thankfully, our back panel does have this little space here for cables. So that's at least one good thing about this case. So go ahead and tuck all these cables in, and that should be all for our cables on the back. And now let's get these cables connected. The first thing I'm gonna do is grab my LED strip and just gonna tuck it in over here. And of course, that's not in the 350, but I think these turn out to be about $5 a pop or something like that. So we're gonna get that in, and then we're gonna connect our CPU power cable to the motherboard. So this actually has 8 pins on this power supply. It's already together, but the motherboard only needs 4, so I'm gonna separate these, and then that's gonna get connected right up there at the top left, and it only goes in one way, and this will actually lock in to a little piece that sticks out there. So don't force it in, line it up, and it should go in fairly easily. I'm gonna tuck this cable out of the way. And then our 24 pin also has a little lock in it. So this will curve. We'll bend it like that and then push. It does take a little bit of force, but you'll hear that little click once it's locked in. And now finally, let's install our graphics card, which is pretty much the most important part for gaming. I'm gonna go ahead and flip this case over, and we first need to remove this little cover for our PCI slots. And then for our motherboard, we're actually gonna be popping out this second little piece of metal, and I'm actually gonna pop the bottom one as well. I'm gonna go ahead and set this back down, and then on our PCI slot, we have this little lock. So I'm gonna push it down to open it up. And then you wanna insert this carefully. These two sections right here need to go between the case and the motherboard. So line it up, don't force it down. Make sure it's lined up to the slot, all those pins, and then just apply a little bit of pressure, and then that lock will actually click up. Once that's in place, I'm gonna put this little cover back on, and you just line up those pins. If you have a larger, heavier graphics card, then you'll want to screw it down first and then attach this cover. But with these smaller graphics cards, you don't really need to because this cover is going to hold it really well. If you bought the exact graphics card that we use, there actually isn't a place to plug in your power. It draws enough from the motherboard and through the PCI Express slot. But if you take our advice and spend about $80 more to get a lot more performance with one of these 580s, you see we do have connectors, and so when that is installed, you'll go ahead and plug this in. Since we don't need that, I'm just gonna go ahead and just tuck this in for later use. And lastly, I'm gonna go ahead and put the side panel back on. A lot of times I won't put it on. I'll go ahead and test it first beforehand, just in case something isn't popped in all the way or screwed in all the way. So I'll just go ahead and take my chances this time and put the cover on. And now for the moment of truth, I'm gonna plug in our power cable and let us see. Bam, there we have it. The fans are spinning. We have our LED light. The CPU is spinning as well. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and connect our monitor, our keyboard, and our mouse. And now we can restart our PC. We're gonna watch for the logo that pops up, and then most motherboards, delete will work to get you into the BIOS. So I'm gonna keep hitting delete over here, and bam, we are in. And right here we see we have 8 gigs of RAM installed, and then we have our CPU installed, Ryzen 3 3100, excellent. Let's go ahead and look at our hardware monitor here. I'm gonna go ahead and shut the system down. I'm gonna grab my Windows 10 USB drive. I created this myself just by going to Microsoft's website, and you can actually legally download Windows 10, and it'll even let you install it without having a serial key. You just have to activate it later. You can still use it for a long time that way, or you can buy a license online or use an old one. I'm gonna go ahead and plug it in to our USB 3.0 slot and turn on the PC. I'm gonna hit F11, and that gets us to our boot menu for this motherboard. And I actually noticed Windows right away. So it's gonna be loading us into here. And from this point on, you just follow these step-by-step little sections to install Windows. It's fairly easy. If you don't have a product key, you just hit, I don't have a product key. I'm gonna select Windows 10 Home. Since this is a new PC build, I'm gonna hit custom install, and here we'll see our SSD. I'm gonna click on it and hit next, and right away, it's gonna start getting ready and installing Windows. Since we have an SSD and we have a USB 3 thumb drive with the USB 3 port, it's gonna install fairly quickly. As soon as it's done, you're just gonna hit your normal Windows setup, just like you bought a PC from the store. So that part's fairly easy. The next step you wanna do is plug in your PC to the internet with an Ethernet cable, or you can buy a Wi-Fi card or even a Wi-Fi USB adapter if you don't have a long cable or you want to place it somewhere else. This one right here, I'll link in the video description. It is very, very cheap if you're on the budget, but it still supports Wi-Fi 5, so you're going to get good speeds. And then you just let Windows update and download all of the drivers, and from there you can start installing your games. Thank you guys for watching. Once again, we have all the links in the video description along with alternatives just in case something is sold out or the price went up, and we'll have some upgrades if you guys have a little bit more money to spend. Make sure you guys click that circle above if you guys want to see us actually gaming on this system. We're gonna have that video coming up soon. This has been Max, and we'll see you in the next video.